The town square of Ironwood was alive with the noise of wagons, cattle, and hard men trading goods. But at the far end, where the dust never settled and shadows clung like guilt, an auctioneer's voice cut through the noise with cruel cheer. On the block stood women, frightened and silent, some bound, some too weary to look up, their futures traded like livestock. And then came the strangest sight. A figure led forward with a burlap sack over her head, her hands tied loosely at her sides, her body trembling though she made no sound. The crowd roared with laughter, mocking the mystery, guessing whether she was scarred or a thief or simply broken. The auctioneer laughed along, calling for bids, his voice booming. $2 to start. Gentlemen, $2 for what may be beauty or beast. Men jeered, some tossing coins only to retract them with jokes, until from the edge of the crowd a deep, quiet voice broke through. Elias Crane, the lumberjack who worked the pines north of Ironwood, raised his calloused hand and said simply, $2. The square fell silent, for everyone knew Elias alone. Towering, a man who swung an axe like it weighed nothing but who never spoke more than necessary. No one dared bid against him. The hammer dropped, and with 2 lonely coins Elias bought the woman no one else wanted. And as he stepped forward to claim her, he untied the rope himself, his hands gentle as he lifted the sack away. When the burlap sack fell, a hush swept the crowd. The woman's face was pale, framed by tangled hair, her eyes wide with fear yet burning with defiance. She drew in a ragged breath, blinking in the harsh daylight, as though the world itself stung after being hidden so long. Elias held her gaze, not with hunger or mockery like the others, but with the steady calm of a man who saw her as human first. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, even as the crowd snickered. For a long moment, she said nothing, her lips pressed tight, but then, like a dam breaking, she whispered, "Margaret." The sound of it was fragile, almost lost in the noise of wagons, yet it carried straight into Elias's chest. "Margaret," he repeated, as if anchoring her to the world with that single word. The auctioneer rolled his eyes, already barking for the next lot, but Elias paid him no mind. He placed his coat around Margaret's shoulders, shielding her from the stairs, and guided her away. The town watched in stunned silence as the giant lumberjack, who had never taken a wife, never courted, never bowed to gossip, led the woman no one dared touch down the street as though she were something precious. And in that moment, though she still trembled, Margaret felt the smallest spark of safety. The first she had known in years. Elias's cabin stood deep in the pine forest, where the air smelled of resin and wood smoke. Far from the cruel eyes of Ironwood, Margaret sat by the fire, staring at her blistered hands, while Elias moved quietly about the cabin, preparing food with the same patience he used in splitting logs. He didn't question her, didn't press for stories of how she ended up at the auction block. Instead, he treated her like a guest, offering bread and stew, water and warmth. Days passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of fire or the swing of Elias's axe outside. And slowly, the tension in Margaret's shoulders began to ease. One night, as the wind howled through the trees, she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I was taken, sold, passed from hand to hand until I was nothing more than a price." Her eyes filled with shame, but Elias met them steadily. "That was then," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "Here, you're not a price. You're a person. You're Margaret." The words settled into her like seeds in good earth, and for the first time since childhood, she felt seen, not as property, not as a burden, but as herself. The cabin, once silent and lonely, began to fill with something new, laughter, tentative at first, then freer, until even Elias found himself smiling more often, the shadows in his eyes lifting with each day she stayed. Peace, however, was not something Ironwood allowed to last. One evening, as Elias rode into town for supplies with Margaret at his side, the sneers returned. Men mocked, saying the lumberjack had married a mystery with a sack on her head, that only a fool would claim damaged goods. Margaret shrank under the laughter, her scars invisible but burning all the same, until Elias turned, his voice carrying like thunder. "Enough!" The saloon doors swung open, and one of the very men who had once kept Margaret shackled stepped forward, recognizing her with a cruel grin. "Well, look who's back," he sneered. Didn't think I'd see my runaway again. Margaret froze, the past rushing back like a flood. But Elias stepped in front of her, his fists tightening, his voice like iron. She's not yours. She was never yours. And if you think otherwise, you'll answer to me. The man laughed, reaching for his pistol, but Elias was faster, his axe handle swinging from his belt, knocking the weapon clean from the man's grip before it could clear leather. Gasps rose as Elias loomed over him. No man owns her, he growled. The coward slunk back, muttering, and the crowd parted, their laughter silenced. Elias guided Margaret out of town, his hand steady on hers, and as they rode home, she whispered through tears, "Why do you fight for me?" He looked at her with quiet certainty. "Because you're worth fighting for." Seasons turned, and the cabin in the pines became a home not just of wood but of warmth, filled with laughter, with shared meals, with the quiet strength of two souls healing together. One spring morning, Elias took Margaret's hand beneath the budding trees and asked, without grand words, without a crowd, "Will you be my wife?" Margaret's heart raced, for she had been claimed before, owned before, but never asked, never given the choice, and that choice was everything. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes," not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Elias smiled, rare and wide, and they married under the open sky, no church bells, no witnesses but the trees and the birds. From that day on, she was not Margaret the captive, nor Margaret the woman with a sack over her head. She was Margaret Crane, a free woman who chose her husband as he chose her. The whispers in town faded with time, for strength and love silenced gossip louder than fists ever could. Together, they built a life where scars were not hidden but honored, proof of survival. And dear friends, if this story of redemption, love, and courage touched your heart, don't just let it pass like dust on the wind. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more Wild West stories, where broken souls find healing and even the loneliest hearts discover home.